Shalom all, happy Sabbath to you and welcome to today's study. Genesis chapters 16 to 18, lesson 5 I believe, but don't hold me to that. Sorry it's a bit late, it's been a busy day. The points we'll be covering is the birth of Ishmael, where Sarah gives Hagar, her maid, to Abraham to get a child. The Circumcision Covenant given by God to Abraham, and the promise of a son, the son being Isaac rather than Ishmael. And lastly, Sodom and Gomorrah, what happens there. God appeared to Abraham, and then he sent some other angels to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So starting at Genesis 16 verse 1, which reads, Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Now here we have children, or what shall I say, intermarriages between the Hebrews, Abraham, and actually I shouldn't call it, yes, I would call it marriage because that's what marriage is, but between Abraham and Egyptian, as we did with Joseph and the wife he married. Now Hagar was given to Abraham when he got a lot of things from Pharaoh in Exodus chapters 12 of verse 6, when Pharaoh mistook Sarah for Abraham's sister, because that's what Abraham told him until God clarified the situation. So Abraham came out with lots of livestock, male and female servants, all from Pharaoh. Now it is possible to say, in one, we don't know what nationalities all his servants were. Pharaoh could have had servants from different nations, but they definitely were not Hebrew. My point is, Abraham's household were mostly, or all, non-Hebrews. Only himself and Sarah would have been a Hebrew. And a similar thing will happen to Isaac when the same thing happens to him. He comes out with lots of servants, which again will not be Hebrew. And then Esau inherits those. But then later, Jacob, when he goes to Laban, he comes out with many servants, which again would not be Hebrew. So my point is, note the composition of the household of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are non-Hebrew people mainly. In verse 2, we have an Abraham hearkened to the voice of Sarah, same as Adam and Eve, or same as Adam did with Eve, where she persuaded Adam to do something he shouldn't have done. So here we have the husband Abraham also listening to wife Sarah. Verse 3 says, And Sarah gave her, meaning Hagar the Egyptian, to her husband Abraham to be his wife. So as I said above, it does make her his wife. Verse 4, And he went into Hagar. Now note, there's no priest, there's no church wedding, there's no ceremony. Simple. And we also remember that woman, the Hebrew word for woman and wife is the same word. Just that in English it's translated as two words, wife and woman. Okay, going to verse 10. An angel of Yahweh said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. This is talking to Hagar when she ran away because her and Sarah had a disagreement, let's say, and God found her crying. Verse 11, And the angel of Yahweh said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because Yahweh hath heard thy affliction. So God gave a similar promise of multiplication to Israel as he did to Abraham and later to Isaac. This multiplication is given to Ishmael, as he also later on does with Israel and Isaac. But the point to note is God names Ishmael. He didn't leave it for Hagar to name him. God names Ishmael the same way he or he gives it in the name of Isaac, and later on he gives names of many people, i.e. John the Baptist and Yeshua. So when God names people, we know they are important to him, something special about them. Okay, verse 15, Genesis 16:15. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare Ishmael. So obviously Hagar must have told Abraham what happened, and she heard from God, and Abraham named the son Ishmael. Now, the Muslims will claim today that that is where they get the connection back to Abraham. Just a little bit of history about the Ishmaelites who came from Ishmael. We will see later on, that also had 12 tribes in Genesis chapters 25 verse 16. They were also called Hagarites or Hagarenes and Arabians. 1 Chronicles 5:10 and Isaiah 13:20. If I remember rightly, it will be them who sell Joseph into Egypt, but we'll correct that if I'm wrong when we get there. They did harass Israel for a time, but they were overcome by Gideon in Judges chapters 8 verses 10 to 21. During the reign of the more powerful kings, they became more peaceful, inclined to the Israelites. They even sent presents to King Solomon and King Jehoshaphat in 1 Kings 10:15 and 2 Chronicles 17:11. Okay, chapter 17 and verse 1. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, Yahweh appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be perfect. And I will, means that is the condition. Walk before me and be perfect, and I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. So God's blessings and covenant is always conditional on obedience to his instructions, despite the false unconditional grace teachings of today. Verse 3, and Abraham fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying he was going to make a covenant with him. So we have God talking to Abraham as he did with Noah and originally with Adam, even regarding the birth of Isaac. Verse 4, as for me, behold, my covenant, this is God speaking to Abraham, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. So Abraham was not just going to be a singular Israel, father of a single Israel nation, but all righteous ones. That was the argument Paul made in Romans 4:12, that the father of many nations came before the Circumcision Covenant of chapter 17, verse 13, which applies solely to Israel, which we see later on, and their household. We should also talk about this covenant that God's going to make with Abraham in respect of Acts chapters 15 verse 2, which is circumcision, and Romans chapters 4 verse 10. How was it then reckoned? When he was in circumcision or in uncircumcision, Paul goes on to say. And he says, not in circumcision, but in uncircumcision. So in other words, God promised Abraham he would be a father of many nations before he was circumcised. When we get down to verse 13, we will see it says, he that is born in thy house and he that is bought with money must be circumcised. And explain who those he are later on. Verse 5 and verse 15. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for father of many nations have I made thee. Now in Hebrew, the name Abram means exalted father, and the name Abraham means father of multitude. Now see, names are specific and have specific sounds. Even though Abram and Abraham may be similar to us, God still wanted a specific sound to be to be applied to Abraham's name. And as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14:7, everything has a distinctive sound, and the distinctive sounds are very important. God changed the names of people who were important to them, as does the devil, and those who worship the devil change names of those who worship false gods, like they did with Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys. You will see that in Daniel chapters 1 verse 7 when we get there. Now we should use original names as Yeshua rather than replace them with English translations as Jesus. Because, as Acts 4:12 says, neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name, meaning the sound, under heaven given among men, whereby we must be saved. So the sound is very important. Okay, Genesis chapter 17 verse 8. And I will give thee, still God talking, and to thy seed, we can identify who that seed is, after thee, the land wherein thou art a stranger, and all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Verse 10, this is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and thy seed. The same as verse 1. After thee, every man child among you shall be circumcised. Verse 12. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations. He that is born in the house, or bought with money, or any stranger which is not of thy seed. He that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with money, must needs be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. Verse 14. And the uncircumcised man-child, whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that a soul shall be cut off from his people. He have broken my covenant. So note the identification of Abraham's seed are those who would be given the land. As I said, verse 8 says, and I will give unto thee and thy seed after thee the land. So it's not everyone that comes out of Abraham's loins, such as Ishmael, for example. It's the ones who are going to get that land. So the circumcision covenant is limited to those same ones, and they are to keep the covenant of circumcision as a member or token of the covenant. Now, when we come to Joshua, when we come to Promised Land, we'll see all who came out of Egypt with Moses, and who didn't die of in the wilderness, including the strangers, were given land. In other words, there was a mixed multitude who came out of Egypt, and as I already identified, they are generally non-Hebrews. As the majority of those of the households, Abraham's and Jacob's, so on, are generally non-Hebrews. A stranger became part of the household of whatever Israeli family they belonged, just like Abraham's and later Jacob's servants became part of his household, his family. And we shall see in Exodus chapters 20 verse 8, 12 verse 49, and especially in Numbers 15:16, it was one law for everybody in the household, regardless of what nationality they were. They were treated as one, but not the Gentiles who were not part of them. Now, this is what Paul was talking about in his epistles, that the circumcision was a covenant given to those of Israeli, if I call it, or Hebrew descent. And Hebrew Israeli could mean the ones who came out of Egypt, the descendants of those, which included the strangers who attached themselves to them and became part of them. My point is that circumcision, and Paul's point, was not to non-Israelites who later inherited who were not part of that group or descendants of that group. This is the foundation of Paul's epistles in the New Testament and the decision of the council in Acts 15. Gentiles, those of other nations who come to faith in Yahweh or even Yeshua, do not have to be circumcised. Now, by the time of the New Testament, the Jews had adopted this covenant sign as a law of Moses, and therefore insisted that the Gentile believers should also be circumcised and keep the works of the law.
However, circumcision was not a law, it is a covenant sign. The nearest you get to circumcision being a law, which is in Leviticus chapters 12, if I remember rightly, to do with the cleanliness of a woman after childbirth. And that is to do with cleanliness of the woman, not to do with circumcision.
However, it is not a law. It was a covenant sign to a certain limited number of people. I hope this helps you better understand Paul's epistles, for example in Galatians, which deals with circumcision. Yet many are taught it deals with the entire law or commandments of God, and they therefore use those kind of epistles to think they do not have to keep the laws and commandments of God. Now, going back to verse that talks about who gets the land. We know there's a fight or claim. Everyone's claiming this land of Jerusalem. You heard Donald Trump say he's going to move the embassy to Jerusalem as a recognition as it belongs to Israel. But the United Nations and all its members have dispensed with the biblical decree of God and denying that Jerusalem belongs to the Jews or the Israelis. Now, associated with this promise of God is why many are now claiming to be the real Jews, in my belief, Israelites, yet they do not keep the commandments of God. Okay, back to Genesis, verse 20, chapter 17, verse 20. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him. This is God talking to Hagar. And will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this time. So at this set time next year. So this is God talking to Abraham, not Hagar now. Man said, Ishmael, 12 princes came out of him, the same way as 12 tribes of Israel came out of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Verse 17:26. In the same day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son, and all the men of his house, born in the house and bought with money of the stranger, were circumcised with him. Now, only two of, let's say, people from Abraham's loins were circumcised, him and Ishmael, and yet all his household, which included all the other men, were also circumcised. So your strangers, whoever you brought money, your servants, all become part of your household. So as I said, Abraham treats his household the same in accordance with the terms of the covenant. See also Exodus chapters 20 verse 10 and Exodus 12:49, which reads, one law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourn among you. And also Leviticus chapters 24 verse 22, you shall have one manner of law as well for the stranger as for one of your own country, for I am Yahweh your God. And Numbers 15:16, one law and one manner shall be for you and for the stranger that sojourn with you. Okay, chapter 18 verse 2. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, this is Abraham, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself. Verse 22. And the men turned their faces from thence and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before Yahweh. Or the Bible says the Lord. So what we then find out that one of these 3 persons is God taking the form of a human being. Now we don't call this person God, we call them, or we don't call this, they have not given a name, we just called 3 men. So it's not a miracle for God instead to bring the Messiah, to have him been born through a human Mary, so that he can go through the birth of the human and experience the same infirmities as a human. In other words, live like a human and show us how we can do it as a human. We do not have to call it a human manifestation of God. So this manifestation in a human form does not contradict what it says in John chapter 1 verse 18. No man hath seen God at any time. Because they're not seeing God in a spiritual form, they're seeing him taking up a human form so that we can see him and hear him. Okay, now we know that one of these 3 men is God. Well, firstly, Abraham, the Bible says it is God or the Lord when he's bartering for the lives of those in Sodom. But then when it starts chapter 19, it says, 19 verse 1, it says, and there came 2 angels to Sodom at the evening, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself. So clearly the third person who didn't go on to Sodom but stayed talking with Abraham was God in human form. Now by the time we come down to 1814 is where God is promising that Abraham and Sarah would have a child from their own loins without going through, say, the surrogate mother or going through Hagar. And it says, verse 14, is anything too hard for Yahweh? Because Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, and they thought they would be on childbearing. At the time appointed, I will return unto thee, according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. So this time appointed or appointed times is the same Hebrew word as we see in Genesis 1:14 and Leviticus 23. God appoints times for things to be done. And in Leviticus 23, he has appointed specific times for us to have holy convocations. We are not to choose or create our own times. They are unholy times. Verse 19, 18:19 that is, God speaking again. For I know him, speaking of Abraham, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of Yahweh, to do justice and judgment, that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. So God is saying that he knows what Abraham is like, that he will do right, and because he will do right, that is why God is going to bring that which God has spoken of him. Genesis 18:26, and Yahweh said, if I find 50 righteous people, and then it goes down to 10. So here I'm bringing this to your point that God always has a condition. That's one thing we should learn, and learn well, is that there's always an if with God. His salvation and grace is not unconditional, as many teach and believe, and many may end up with the devil for adversely acting on such belief. We shall see that the condition of if throughout God's teachings, look out for it. For example, in Ezekiel chapter 33 verse 13, which says, when I say to the righteous that he shall surely live, if he trusts to his own righteousness and commit iniquity, all his righteousnesses shall not be remembered, but for his iniquity that he hath committed, he shall die for it. Verse 14, again I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die. Again, when I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, if he turn from his sin and do that which is lawful and right. So see, there's always the if condition. Now in verse 13, I'll read it again. When I say to the righteous man that he shall surely die, If he trusts in his own righteousness, first part, and the second part to draw attention, and commit iniquity, all his righteousness shall not be remembered. The righteous did not die for trusting in his own righteousness. Paul speaks of one's own righteousness within the law, meaning one can earn salvation through righteous works, contrary to what people teach. The verse has two parts, which I stressed. Trusting in one's own righteousness and then going on to commit iniquity. After that sin, one can no longer trust in their own righteousness. They then need the grace of God to forgive the iniquity. That is where faith in Yeshua's sacrifice comes in. Grace through faith, as it says in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. For by grace are you saved, through faith, and not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. It doesn't say it's a free gift of God. There's always an if condition. The grace is given or needed for those who sin, not for those who have perfectly kept the law and have not sinned. They can then trust in their own righteousness. The chapter ends with Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed and God just saving Lot and his daughters, because the wife turned back and turned a pillar of salt. Now they were destroyed for being wicked. Wicked was being what we today call gay, a man aligned with another man, which is contrary to a law later given, passed on, shall I say, through Moses, Leviticus chapters 20-13. Shalom, and hopefully we speak again tomorrow.
God willing.